Brett Collins received his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he is currently a coordinator of inclusion and equity efforts across the campus. His research largely focuses on white supremacy, inclusion and equity, and classical reception. So here he's going to be giving us a presentation today with the title, Institutionalizing Justice Towards a Racially Conscious Classics. So please join me in welcoming Brett. I'm going to, now you don't have to look at my face anymore.
Now you get to look at my face.
Brett.
Good morning. Thank you, Hannah and Joe, for organizing this awesome conference and finding a way to make lemonade given the current circumstances. And I just want to preface by also saying that I have an incredibly active and vocal cat in the mornings, and so I'm sitting at her favorite table currently. So if she decides to make her frustration known, I apologize in advance. Okay, to my mind, there is no more challenging and urgent matter for higher education and classics to address than race and racial justice. While you would be hard-pressed to find a university president or chancellor who is against a more inclusive and representative student body, there has been little progress made to address the systemic racial inequities in higher education to date. Admissions and outreach are not reflecting the demographics of the communities they serve. Non-white students and scholars, especially female identifying, are much more likely to leave or be forced out of the academy. And climates on campus across the nation have become increasingly more hostile as bias incidents, hate speech, and xenophobia are rising year over year. Furthermore, the academic pipeline is leaky at every stage for non-white students. The exclusion of non-white students and scholars happens at extremely high rates between high school and undergrad, even higher rates from undergrad to grad school, and culminating in borderline invisibility in the professional corps. According to the National Science Foundation, about a little over 35,000 US citizens and permanent residents received doctorates in 2018, of which 5,100 were in the humanities, and only 3.9% of that, or 205, were Black. The number for classics are infinitely worse. Of those 5,100 humanities degrees, about 94 were in classics, and only 2 were Black scholars, while 84% were white. Those numbers would indicate that most US campuses proceed annually with no Black scholars pursuing doctorates in humanities departments, and the entire field of classics can go years without awarding a doctorate to a single Black scholar. As Mathura Umachandran states, quote, "Unless you can credibly defend the idea that Black and brown people are either not interested or not smart enough to study ancient Greece and Rome, then structural oppression and discrimination have to be a plausible part of any account for this fact." Put simply, the structural oppression and discrimination is by design. The Academy did not just inherit the pipeline, but has played a substantial role in engineering and maintaining its leakiness. I have 2 key points I want to make today. First, universities and disciplines were historically structured as racial projects and still play a significant role in reproducing and reinforcing racial narratives and hierarchy. Second, in order for us to disrupt this historical and contemporary investment in white supremacy, we must reimagine our practices from an epistemic position that centers race, specifically through the lens of critical race theory. Over the last 2 decades, critical race theory has become an increasingly popular framework for interrogating the inequities in our educational system. Taking as its starting point that racism is endemic to American culture, the classroom, therefore, like all racialized structures, cultivates white supremacy through the perpetuation of structures, processes, and traditions that reinforce racial hierarchies, like hiring decisions or graduate admissions or tenure review. White supremacy in this context being the normalcy, advantage, privilege, and innocence that is extended to those who possess and defend whiteness. Furthermore, critical race theory invites us to interrogate how the ideology of colorblindness stifles efforts towards racial justice and preserves the social and cultural capital of whiteness. It theorizes the university as a site in which racialized ideologies are reproduced and professionals who become policymakers are trained, which is in part why I'm centering my analysis on the university today. The social value placed on the university and unearthing the racialized power of this value is critical for any inquiry into racial hierarchies in classrooms at all levels. The epistemic position of the critical race theorist is founded on the following beliefs. First, that racism is endemic, not aberrational, to American culture, and the individual racist need not exist to note that racism is pervasive. Second, racism has deeply rooted origins that attribute white people with dominant status and non-white people with subordinate status. Third, a rejection of dominant narratives, processes, or systems that claim race neutrality, colorblindness, and meritocracy. Fourth, the voices of and lived experiences of people of color are legitimate and used to generate oppositional discourses via storytelling and narrative. Fifth, recognition of the conditions by which racial justice has been accommodated in a white power structure. And finally, racism's eradication is tied to eliminating all forms of oppression, and thus intersectional strategies, both pragmatic and eclectic, should be pursued in the struggle for racial justice. While it takes the constructiveness of race as a category as a starting point, thus aligning itself with feminist and queer theorists interrogating socially constructed identities, critical race theory emphatically reiterates the reality of our racialized society and its impact on raced people in everyday lives. Critical race theory urges recognizing race not as an inherent characteristic of people, but instead a product of social practices. It is our job as instructors, researchers, and activists to interrogate and address the ways in which classics has participated in these social practices of racing people. Classics too has seen a surge in work that excavates the discipline's racial histories and promotes more racially conscious practices in the field. Some of the folks who have been influential for me and